Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa Colledge. Welcome to Culture by Neurodesign. Today I want to take a look at the world of cybersecurity, military intelligence and defense to discuss the strong match between the skills needed to do really well at this work and neurodivergent thinking styles. So there's a natural attraction between cybersecurity and neurodivergence. As you'd expect, people like to work where they can use their natural skill sets, where they can perform well, where they can enjoy the work, and there's no reason why this should be any different for neurodivergent people than for anybody else. Now, a couple of episodes ago, episode 33, I discussed another example of this when I talked about how autistic examples are naturally drawn to Silicon Valley, but today I'm going to talk about the natural attraction for cyber security. I'll focus mainly on the autistic neurostyle here in this episode as well. So this is a really great example to show how important it is for us all to be open to difference. So if we're not open to different neurostyles in our team, we won't get the best suited minds working in these critical areas of effective intelligence and defense. These minds that we want are often not going to be the best in interviews, especially when they get asked questions like, where do you want to be in 5 years? They may well answer literally here, or honestly, I don't know. Now, here's a quick anecdote about my son, who's autistic and who at bedtime likes to follow his series of rituals. They're calming rituals for him. So if we ask him, Chris, where are you? Meaning, where are you in a series? He answers, here. It's an accurate answer to our question. The fault's actually with us for not being precise enough to get the answer that we're looking for. But his answer doesn't fit the unspoken expectations of our question. And that's something that you may see in interviews. You may also well not get polished small talk or eye contact, but if you can be open to this difference and upskill yourself to enable people with this different style to work in your team, what you do get is extraordinary attention to detail, fantastic pattern recognition, and strong visual processing. And that's the match with national defense teams. These are very highly sought after skills. So when matched to the right kind of work, they become national security assets. So let's start with some examples. Now, around the world, military and intelligence agencies are actively recruiting people with autism and other neurodivergences. And this isn't anything to do with charity. It's because they absolutely demand high performance. And to achieve this, they need skills that just happen to often be associated with neurodivergent minds. So in Israel, there's the very famous Unit 9900, which is a specialist branch of the Israeli Defense Force, and it's responsible for analyzing aerial and satellite images. Now, this particular unit is entirely composed of autistic people. Now, this is not a feel-good program to tick the inclusion box. Selection is very, very rigorous, and candidate analysts have to show that they can spot subtle visual anomalies like changes in terrain that might indicate a threat. And to give a clue as to the kind of skills that are useful, one officer, referred to only as Corporal N, who's part of Unit 9900 and therefore autistic, described how she's able to hold a mental image and rotate it and inspect it from multiple angles. And I'll come back to this skill in a while. Now, inspired by Unit 9900, the Australian Department of Defence has created a cybersecurity training program specifically to cultivate autistic strengths. And participants need to be strong at pattern recognition because they're examining very messy data for signs of intrusion or attack. Now, here's a couple more examples. In the US, the neurodiverse federal workforce pilot recruits autistic professionals into cyber roles. And one of their taglines talks about tapping cognitive potential to strengthen national security. So they're very proud of their mission. And in the UK, GCHQ, the government communications headquarters, has long recruited dyslexic individuals for signal intelligence and detection of anomalies. The signal intelligence involves intercepting and analysing electronic signals, and dyslexic people tend to excel at seeing the big picture, looking at a picture holistically and spotting what doesn't quite fit. Now, I talked about this skill in episode 16, but To share a quick statistic here, 84% of GCHQ dyslexic candidates score above average in pattern recognition. So obviously, if you put these kind of abilities where they matter, you're going to have a competitive edge in national defence. And let's move on to trying to understand how neurodivergent people see the kind of electronic signal information and messy data that they're being offered to analyse in these roles. And to do this, I'm going to use insights shared by Temple Grandin. Now, she is an autistic lady. She's done a huge amount to raise awareness of autism around the world and to bring a positive lens to the potential that autistic children and autistic adults have through her writing and through her speaking. She's also a highly regarded animal behaviourist, and she designs humane livestock handling systems to reduce the stress that cattle experience on their way to slaughter. The Temple makes efforts to understand how other people think by asking them, and she also keeps up to date with the research literature so she can understand how her style is different, and so that she's able to communicate her inner world with clarity to people who don't naturally experience the inner world. And I find that very helpful to understand the kind of cognition that she's describing that I don't have. I think with words, but she writes, and to quote, "All my thoughts are like videos. When I visualize a cat, I see videos of every cat I've ever seen. There's no generalized cat concept." End of quote. And another example, this is also a quote, "Language and words are alien ways of thinking for me. My mind works like the computer programs used to make high-tech special effects in movies. I can take many different bits and pieces and combine them into new images." End of quote. So Grandin is describing a thinking style which is highly visual and also non-linear. She says that she struggled with algebra in school, not anything to do with intelligence, but because the sequential verbal kind of logic that you need to be good at algebra is alien to her. Now, I'm really good at algebra with my word-based logical sequential thinking, but her mind doesn't run on words. It runs on visuals, it runs on simulation. She describes extremely strong visualization abilities. She has written in another article that she sometimes even forgets to turn on her car's headlights at night because her visual system is so acute that she can see fine in the dark. And she doesn't have that trigger to, turn on headlights so that you can see where you're going, which someone like I will have. So when she applies these skills to designing animal handling systems, she has described starting to create the system in her head. She designs in her head, and she's able to step into that system from both her perspective outside of the system and also from the animal's perspective within the system. And she's able to rotate her design and simulate the movement of the cattle moving through the design and imagine the sound and pressure that they're going to experience, like a custom-built film running in her brain. So Temple Grandin is one example, obviously, but I like to use her example because she's written so prolifically, and also because her examples are grounded in the research literature which she keeps up with, and she weaves her personal experiences into that research literature. But any neurodivergent individuals, not only autists, may think this way, spatially, visually, associatively. And this is not a style that's exclusively owned by neurodivergent people. It's also a style that neurotypical people can think in, but it does seem to be associated with neurodivergence more often than you would think. It's a cognitive style, though, that doesn't always fit into our traditional school and workplace settings. However, in the right role, such as military intelligence, it can be a superpower. Now, what Temple is describing and what she experiences intuitively, because it's her style and what she shares with us, that's also confirmed by neuroscience. And to illustrate this, I'm going to share a theory that's been developed by Professor Laurent Mottron. Now, I talked about Laurent in episode 15. He's a leading autism researcher who doesn't only study autistic cognition, but he also collaborates with autistic researchers in his own lab. And in episode 15, I shared his experiences of the very innovative outcomes that happen when he combines his thinking style with that of an autistic team member. But here what I want to focus on is the theory that he's developed. And that theory is called the enhanced perceptual functioning theory. And it really is one of those contributions which turns the deficit model of autism on its head. So he's shown that autistic people often have heightened visual perception. You can show this, for example, in fMRI studies, that's a kind of brain imaging studies, in which autistic people display increased activation in the areas of the brain which correspond to visualization, and a reduced reliance on the areas that correspond to working memory and language-based reasoning. In a recent study that he published, participants were asked to complete tasks that corresponded to 4 different stages of creating and using a visualization. So the first is to create a mental image, the second is to hold it, the third is to inspect it, and the fourth is to manipulate it. Now, he found that autistic participants performed equivalently to neurotypical participants at generating the image, but they're significantly better at being able to retain the image in their memory. Now, if you don't actively retain an image in your memory, it's gone, apparently, within about a quarter of a second. But if you're able to hold it there for longer, as a lot of autistic people are, then you can better manipulate it. And studies have shown that autistic people are able to rotate geometric figures in space, in their heads, more accurately than neurotypical people, and also spot differences between 2 quite similar geometric figures much more reliably than neurotypical people. So in short, autistic people don't just see differently, they process information differently. Mottron's theory says that they're more precise and less influenced by previous knowledge, by expectation. And indeed, there's a lot of research showing that autistic brains are more resistant to the cognitive shortcuts that have let us respond quickly in life and death situations, but that are approximations and so lead us to bias. So if you're more interested in hearing, in hearing more about that, about the logical, rational thinking style of autists, then you can listen to more about that in episode 34. But to come back to the theme of this episode, these differences are exactly what makes autistic candidates so effective in fields like cybersecurity, intelligence analysis, and systems architecture. However, there's a tricky part that I've alluded to already a couple of times, and that is that these strengths can often go unappreciated because our typical educational and workplace systems are designed around quite a narrow band of cognitive styles. Think about school, for example. That almost always rewards verbal linear thinkers. That's people who memorize well, who can follow sequential steps, and who can recollect concepts in a particular order. But for minds like Temple Grandin's, that approach simply doesn't allow her to show what she can do, and it doesn't allow her to contribute her best. And she once shared an example about not being able to understand the abstract idea of independence until she physically walked through a door on the roof of her boarding school and was able to associate that concrete experience with the abstract word. Another great example that helped me to understand her thinking style is that she says when she hears the word over, she visualizes a dog jumping over a fence. There's no semantic definition for her like I have with my word-based thinking, just a vivid memory of a dog jumping over a fence. And this helps to explain why autistic and dyslexic children often struggle with words like the, and, through. There's a whole list of these words that don't lend themselves easily to visual imagery. So yes, many people struggle in school, but for people who think very differently, the gap between what they can do in the wrong environment, like school for them, versus in the right one, such as what we can create in the workplace, that gap can be extraordinary. And if you give people responsibilities that fit their thinking style, they don't just do well, they often excel. I want to end this podcast with two crucial points. First, this is not about diagnosis. Right? I'm not suggesting that if you have a job open where pattern recognition is key, that you require people to show a diagnosis of autism or dyslexia to qualify. There are many reasons why this is not a good approach. For example, many autistic or dyslexic people don't know it or don't want to share it. Another example is that these qualities that I'm talking about are also not exclusive to neurodivergent people. They just happen to be found there in the group of neurodivergent people more frequently than they are in neurotypical people. What really matters is creating a culture where different styles are welcomed and enabled so that everyone who brings these strengths is able to contribute, so that you don't only attract a subset of the possible talent pool with these skills. Now, if your role requires detailed visual inspection or pattern recognition, there's a good chance that neurodivergent candidates will be drawn to it. So understand this, accept it, and prepare for it. Don't wait for people to show you a diagnosis and ask for accommodations. Just create an environment where they can thrive. And second, success doesn't come from uniformity. It doesn't come from having all autistic brains together any more than it comes from having all word-thinking brains together. So in the Israeli Defense Force, it doesn't come only from Unit 9900, because there are other units as well, which are not completely composed of autistic people. Success comes from complementarity. Now, autistic detail detection pairs beautifully with the big picture thinking, the holistic perception often found in dyslexic minds. And when you combine those couple of styles, for example, with neurotypical strengths like being very attuned to social needs or a narrative style of thinking, then you get a team with the potential to really see and execute anything that you want to achieve. A true neuro-inclusive team culture means building the habits and the connections that let different minds work together. There might be disagreement because there's going to be natural friction between different styles, but with the right frameworks to consciously build this culture of neuro-inclusion, you don't just avoid problems, you're going to amplify strengths and amplify the outcomes that your team can achieve. So now that you've listened to this podcast, what can you do? Well, notice how people solve problems and ask respectfully and with curiosity what works well about a particular approach with someone. Ask to learn, don't ask to try to correct them to your way, okay? And then be open to the differences. Notice the advantages that they offer, as well as situations in which people using them might struggle, but where other team members may well be naturally suited. Just observe and learn and value these different approaches. And then you can work on helping your team to connect and value these differences too. Now, how to do this is not something which is obvious to most of us, but we can learn it. And I'd be delighted to help you think through how this might look for your team. Thanks for listening.